Hi, this is Mr. Max. So I am doing a few questions on functions, right? So you can have a look through. I have three functions: f, functions g, and functions h. Right. So the very first question wants you to find the value of hg of -2. Then you must find the inverse of x of g. Then you solve the equation f of x is equal to 0. That means you take x squared plus x minus 1 equals to 0. And then you must show all your working and give your final answers correct to two decimal places. Since this is a quadratic equation, you probably have to use a quadratic equation formula to give you but a hint. Then you have composite functions here, fg of x. You have to find that. And you work your way from the back. And then finally, you must solve the inverse of x of h when it's equal to 2. Right, so there are in between some questions that I didn't put up here that I'm gonna do just for explanation purposes. But if you are familiar with the content, perhaps you can pause the video and then you can solve the questions yourselves. And only afterwards you can then check the video to see if you were on the right path. Okay, so let's do the very first question that they want us to find the value of hg of -2. So I have two ways that I'm going to do this. So I brought my functions back here. So basically you're going to start with function g and then you're going to put it into h, or you can take the value. So that means you're going to put -2 into the function that is behind. You always start with the one behind. So I'm going to put -2 into g. And once I put -2 into g, I get an output of 5. And that answer, I'm going to take 5 and I'm going to input it into function h. Function h is h of x equals to 3 raised to the power of x. So now I'm going to simply put 5 everywhere we have an x there. That means that my answer will be 243. So hg of -2 is equal to 243. The second method that you can use, if you don't particularly like first taking the -2, putting into function g, get that answer, put that answer into h, which is seemingly what most of the learners and students prefer. You can also find the formula hg of x, although they didn't ask you for the formula here. But you can find the formula. That means you're going to take the whole of function g and you are going to substitute it everywhere into function h where you have an x. Since the x is the index here, it's going to be 1 minus 2x that's going to be in that place of the index. Now that is my equation, but they want me to find -2. So now I'm just going to put -2 into that formula. And that is also going to give me the same result. So either way, you can decide which one you want to use. Right, then the B part, they also want us to find the inverse of function g. So I brought in a second question, find the inverse of function g equal or 3. G inverse of g, 3. So one way you can do this, first of all, I hope you still remember how to find the inverse of functions. You let that inverse of g be represented by letter y. And I color-coded the y and the x because you're then going to swap the letters around. It's a method that we use because we want to make y the subject of the formula so that x is within our solution. Right, so from here it's just a manipulation of your algebra. Subtract 1 from both sides, then you divide throughout by -2. Well, I don't like the -2 under the denominator, so I'm going to put it up here and I'm going to multiply out that numerator. So that means that the 1 is positive and the x is minus. So it doesn't either matter any one of this. But then rewrite your final answer as the inverse of g of x equals to 1 minus x over 2. Right, so now that you have the formula, you can actually find the inverse of g for 3. So that means everywhere we have an x, we're just going to substitute into that inverse. Right, so that eventually that gives me -1 as an answer. But this is not the only method when it comes to you being given a function and you already determine its inverse. So if you know the function, you can let that inverse value equal to that function. So you can say 1 minus 2x equals to 3. And on the next slide, I'm going to explain what I mean by this. all right, where I'm going to draw these two functions. The function y or g of x is 1 minus 2x is a straight line function. Its inverse is also a straight line function. Right, so when you clean this up here, you are still going to get the very same answer for x equals to -1. For example, if you have the inverse of g of 3, you're going to get an output, and that is the key word, what you get out. So think of this as a machine that you put some value in, and you're expecting to get something out. Right, so what this means here, when I first calculated the inverse using the methods that we use to find the inverse, and then since now I have the inverse and I'm going to find that inverse for 3, what output am I getting? You'll see that I'm getting a -1, but I'm going to get the same -1 when I take the function and let it equal to 3. So let me bring in some graph work here. The red one is the inverse of the function, and the black one is the function that we have. So remember, once we put the function equals to 3, then if you solve this equation, you're going to get -1. But the graph shows you nicely that if you take the y value to equal to 3, you see that the output value is -1, what we have received in the previous case. But if you also then take from the inverse function and you input 3 into that function, and you read off the corresponding output, you see that you get -1 also as the answer. So that is why both methods work, where you find the inverse or the formula for the inverse and then substitute that value into that formula, or you take that inverse value you're given and let it equal to the function. So I'm going to give you another example that you can also try using both methods. Don't forget to click the notification bell. Okay, so let me bring in one more question that is similar to what I was just explaining. So I'm giving you a function here, f of x is equal to x plus 2 over x minus 4. Obviously, x cannot equal to 4, because if that is the case, then the denominator will equal to 0, and the denominator of 0 will give us no value. There is no, it's undefined. It's not possible for us to divide by 0. So that's just the conditions we're given, the constraint. But now you're supposed to find the inverse of f for -4. Right, so maybe you are going to decide to first take the function as it is, and then you want to find the inverse formula, so to speak, of that function. Again, you let that f of x let it be y, and then now you're going to swap the letters around. So the objective is to make y the subject of the formula. So here you must be a bit careful. That is why I introduce brackets, because I sort of cross multiply to clear the fraction. And then I multiply out, because I'm doing this so I can have my y's on one side and my other values on the other side. And once I have xy minus y, I'm going to factor out that y, because remember, I want to make y the subject of the formula, and I divide throughout by x minus 1. So that means that the inverse of the function is then 4x plus 2 over x minus 1, as long as x is not equal to 1. So now if I want to find -4, I simply just punch in -4 everywhere where I have an x into the inverse function. You should get an answer of 2.8. But look at what I said. Remember, I said if you have a function and you're told to find the inverse of value, you just take that function and let it be equal to that inverse value. And you play around with your cross multiplication, so to speak. You solve, remember, for x here, and then if you do that, you get 5x is equal to 14, and x therefore is equal to 14 divided by 5, which gives you the same answer. So you see that both methods work. Right, there was a C part to that question where you're supposed to solve f of x is equal to 0. Simply means take that quadratic equation, let it equal to 0. So what I do is I like to work first the discriminant. The b squared minus 4ac is that part that is under the square root in the quadratic equation formula. And I want to find out what that value is. And once I find that value, I now know from the quadratic equation is going to be that minus b plus the square root of 5 over 2 times 1, which is the value of x here. And the other one will be the same, just with a negative sign. So I'm going to go ahead and give my answers to 2 decimal places. Feel free to write down the full quadratic equation formula. You will also realize that for two decimal places, you arrive at values of x equals to 0.62 and x is equal to about minus 1.61. And that is correct to two decimal places. Right, then the D part that you had to do is you had to take G into F and simplify. So I have the two functions here. So I'm going to start off by taking the whole G, whatever it is, 1 minus 2x, and I'm going to substitute it everywhere where I have an x. So you work from the back. So G into F. All right. So everywhere there's an x, so you see I indicated with the blue. So from here, your job is straightforward. You need to multiply that binomial. And when you do that, you should get 1 minus 4x plus 4x squared. Then you can take away the brackets and you can collect like terms. You should eventually end up with fg of x is equal to 4x squared minus 6x plus 1. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It is very helpful. May help us make this channel famous. Please support Namibian teachers. Right, the E part, you're supposed to solve the equation, the inverse of h equals to 2. Right, let me bring back that function, h of x is equal to 3 to the power x. Right, so first I'm going to swap the letters, as you can see. That means x equals to 3 to the y. And then I'm going to rewrite it in log form. So this can be written as log base 3 of x is equal to y. So I already have my y equals to, but remember we're not looking for y, but we're looking for the inverse. So I'm just going to rewrite it as inverse because our y is actually the inverse. So now that we are here, we can actually find the value of x because we are told let that inverse equal to 2. So if you then take that and you let it equal to 2, then you rewrite log base 3 of x is equal to 2, and then you remove the logs by writing it back into exponential form. That means you're going to say 3 raised to the power of 2 is equal to x. Therefore, the value of x is equal to 9. Okay, so I hope that it was very helpful and that you have picked a few pointers. Don't forget, you can go back, rewind the video, and check if your solutions were okay.